Good afternoon, everyone. I gather you've had a terrific morning, and I hope I won't ruin it too much for you before you guys go to lunch. Terrific to see you here, and really to see some very, very exciting, lively, stimulating young people ready to take pride in India and in how we can go forward. Now, Kumar Bagrodia had already interviewed me once on Litfest X, and now I find that he's got a different hat that's got him to bring me here. I discovered this is the same group, or some of the people here are the same group that I addressed in Thiruvananthapuram last year when the young Indians gathered in their regional conclave. So there you are, some familiar faces. So very, very pleased to be back here and with all of you and see how many of you are interested in the kinds of issues that have been lined up in your very interesting program. I've been asked to talk to you today about India's soft power, and I thought that it's certainly a subject that young Indians need to be conscious of, because while India is obviously no longer the ancient country of wise old greybeards, you actually represent a majority in this country since, what is it now, 50.1% of the population is under 25 and 65% is under 35. So that probably takes care of a whole lot of you, and you are therefore the majority in this country. But I think that we should all take pride not just in the opportunities that confront us in the future, but also in the great distance we've traveled since independence. And it would not be a bad idea to look broadly at one of the more interesting assets, one of the more interesting arrows in the Indian quiver, and that is our soft power. Because, much of the conventional analyses of India's stature in the world, and you've just heard a discussion right now before I came up on stage, tends to focus on the economic assumptions lying our success. Our success is measured in terms of GDP growth, in terms of the percentage that we can point to with pride, which actually this year makes us, I believe, the fastest growing major economy in the world, even ahead of China. But, and I understand that Sadhguru also said something about the limitations of the economic approach. I am notorious for talking about India as a land of paradoxes, and one of those paradoxes, let's face it, is that so many of us speak of India as a great power of the 21st century. Some people even rationally talk about an aspiration to become a superpower. And as you know, one of my many controversies this time a few years ago was when I said, how can we be a superpower when we are still super poor? The truth is, we still have huge challenges. We talk about the population, we talk about the military strength, we talk about economic growth. Bottom line still remains that whether we grow at 6% or 8% or even 10%, what really matters for the future of India is the people at the bottom 25% of our society who have been left out of so much of the success story we've been celebrating. So it's not economic growth, military strength, etc., that I would underscore when I talk about India's great potential in the 21st century world. Rather, I would talk about soft power, which is a relatively new idea in international discourse. It's a term coined by a friend of mine, Professor Joseph Nye at Harvard, to describe the extraordinary strengths, essentially, of the US, which went well beyond American military dominance. The US is a land of Boeing and Coke and Levi Jeans and McDonald's and Hollywood and Disney World and you name it, as well as Boeing and Microsoft and the iPod. Everything that essentially dominates what people consume and use and see and wear around the world originated in America. And so Nye argued that soft power was America's big strength. Now, what is power? Let's get that sorted out. Power is essentially the ability to alter the behavior of others to do what you want them to do, right? So if you have power over somebody, they will oblige you by doing what you want them to do, which is in your interest. Now, classic power is the danda, the stick, hard power, military muscle. If you're a big, strong, potential aggressor, people behave in order not to get on your wrong side, okay? And that also applies, by the way, to the second attribute of power, which is what's called economic power, carrots. If you're a very rich country, no one wants to antagonize you. Maybe you'll give them aid, maybe you'll give them inducements, maybe you'll give them support. So, you got sticks and carrots. But there is actually, Joseph Nye argued, a third kind of power. And that is the power of attraction. You're not coercing people, you're not bribing people, but what you're doing is you're getting them to do what you want because they like you, they admire you. And as he points out, if you have that power of attraction, then you can economize on the sticks and the carrots. So, if you look back on and the theory really struck a big chord when it came out in the early 90s, because traditionally, hard power was what everyone focused on, but then you look at what happened in the second half of the 20th century, the biggest superpower in the world, the US, lost the Vietnam War. The other superpower, the USSR, got driven out of Afghanistan by Motley bunch of Mujahideen. And even in the beginning of the 21st century, let's face it, when the US conquered Iraq, they discovered the truth of Talleyrand, the French statesman Talleyrand's old adage that the one thing you cannot do with a bayonet is to sit on it. So power that comes from the gun, the bayonet force, has limitations when it comes to even running the country you've conquered. So Joseph Nye said, I'm going to take the liberty of quoting him, the soft power of a country rests primarily on three resources: its culture, in places where it's attractive to others, its political values, when it lives up to them at home and abroad, and its foreign policies, when they're legitimate and seen as having moral authority. Now, I'd even go slightly beyond this. To me, a country's soft power emerges from the world's perceptions of what the country is all about. That is, you mention a country's name, what do people immediately think about, right? So the associations and attitudes conjured up in the global imagination by the mere mention of a country's name is often a more accurate analysis, an accurate gauge of a country's soft power than its foreign policies or whatever. Because hard power is exercised. You know the strength of the military, you know you can exercise power. Soft power is evoked. Now, Nye has also taken this theory in a later book to other countries beyond the US, and he said that essentially three types of countries around the world today are likely to gain soft power and so succeed. And though his was a general theory, when I read that last quote, after that no more quotes, I promise you, you can just think of India, though he wasn't mentioning India. So the countries which can have soft power, he said, quote, those whose dominant cultures and ideals are closer to prevailing global norms, which now emphasize liberalism, pluralism, autonomy. Those with the most access to multiple channels of communication and thus more influence over how issues are framed, and those whose credibility is enhanced by their domestic and international performance. Now, what does all this mean for India? It seems to me that if you look at these three types of countries that can exercise soft power in the world, India seems to me a very, very obvious contender. India's claims to a leadership role in the world of the 21st century don't come from our inability to intimidate anyone with our military power. They don't come from the kind of huge economic might that, say, China has. What it lies in is in the aspects and products of Indian society and culture that the world finds attractive. Yes, sometimes they don't go really directly towards persuading people to support us, but they enhance India's standing in the world's eyes. Now, the roots of India's soft power run deep. India's is a civilization that over millennia has offered refuge and, more important, religious and cultural freedom to Jews, Parsis, several varieties of Christians and Muslims. I don't know if some of you heard my speech at JNU last week, where I talked about some of this in detail in a different context, talking about Indian nationalism. But for those who have, forgive me for repeating some points, it's worth mentioning where the cultural heritage of India comes from and where our strengths lie. our hospitability to people. I come from Kerala, where the Jewish refugees fleeing the destruction of their first temple by the Babylonians, at least according to oral legend, and definitely the Jews fleeing the destruction of their second temple by the Romans, showed up in Kerala and were welcomed, and they became the only Jewish diaspora in the history of their race never to have known a single incident of anti-Semitism or persecution by the people amongst whom they had settled. In every other country, they suffered persecution. In fact, when St. Thomas, doubting Thomas the Apostle mentioned in the Bible, landed on the shores of Kerala sometime after Christ, the story goes that he was welcomed on shore by a flute-playing Jewish girl. Islam also came to Kerala peacefully, not by the sword as it was to do in the north, but through traders, travelers, missionaries, bringing the message of the Prophet even in his own lifetime. And they were welcomed. In fact, when some Muslim believers wanted a place to worship, the local king said, fine, we have an unused temple which has been lying around for a while, you can have it. And that is now the oldest mosque in the world outside the Middle East. It's a place called Kodungalur, north of Kochi. And right in the centerpiece of the mosque as you enter is a gigantic lamp, Kerala-style lamp, in the middle of a mosque, because that was the origin of that mosque way back in the 7th century AD. In fact, Muslims were so welcomed in Kerala that one of the kings, the Zamorin of Calicut, went off on pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia to meet the Prophet. He was intrigued by this new faith. He never made it back. He died on the Arabian Peninsula. But what he did leave behind were the seeds of a lot of Kerala coconuts he had taken with him to drink on the journey. And as a result, today, there are Kerala coconut palm trees growing on the coast of the Arabian Peninsula, right near Muscat in Oman. Similarly, another Kerala king a couple of centuries later was so impressed with the seafaring skills of Muslim seamen, the Kunjali Marikas, that he actually issued a decree that every fisherman's family in his constituency had to bring up one child as a Muslim in order to staff his all-Muslim navy. He thought only Muslims could sail so well. Some connection between the way they worship and the way they sail, so he thought. But anyway, the fact is this is our country. Why only talk about Kerala? Let me talk about Gujarat. And I don't mean 21st century Gujarat, for those of you who are worried about my making a political point. Gujarat of the 8th century, when the Parsis the Zoroastrian believers were being persecuted in Persia, and they came, shiploads of them, to the western coast of India. A huge fleet of these Parsi ships came. And the king, alarmed at the prospect of all these foreigners disembarking in his midst, sent an envoy to tell them there was no room for them in Gujarat. Now the envoy, of course, didn't speak the Persian language, and they didn't speak any Gujarati, so to illustrate his point, he took a glass of water, a tumbler of water, dropped a stone in it, and the water overflowed. And that was a way of conveying to the Parsis, look, there's no room for you. If you come, our water will overflow. So the Parsi captain stopped the envoy and said, wait. He summoned a tumbler of milk, and into that he carefully stirred a spoonful of sugar. And his message was, the milk will not overflow, it will only become sweeter by our presence. And of course, the Parsis were welcomed when the king got this message. They settled down in Gujarat, and that's why to this day the mother tongue of Parsis in India is Gujarati. Now, these are the kinds of stories. I grew up in Calcutta, in my high school neighborhood. I still remember the wail of the muezzin calling the Islamic faithful to prayer used to blend with the tinkling of bells at the Shiva temple at the corner of the street, which in turn was competing with the loudspeakers outside the Gurudwara, reading verses from the Guru Granth Sahib. And just round the corner was St. Paul's Cathedral. That is India. Now I can go on and on with lots more examples, but you can understand why the British historian E.P. Thompson said that India is perhaps the most important country for the future of the world, because all the influences in the world run through this society. He said, there is not a thought that is being taught in the East or the West that is not active in some Indian mind. And I'm glad a Brit said that and not an Indian, but it's great to take pride in. Now, we are a land of rich diversities. I've said this so often that I won't belabor the point. We have diversities of geography, of climate, of region, of language, of clothing, of food, ethnicity, you name it. We've got all these diversities. And that's why I notoriously remarked once that we are all a nation of minorities. We're all minorities in India. There's no truly majority community. Because any one of us, if you think because you're a UP Hindu, you belong to the majority community, I'm sorry, your caste puts you in a minority immediately. If you're a Brahmin, only 11% of your fellow Indians are Brahmins. If you're a Yadav, only 15% of your fellow Indians are Yadavs, and so on and so forth. So caste puts you in a minority. And if this wonderful UP Bhaiya shows up at a railway station and say, my home state of Kerala, he'll discover that a majority there is not even male. So let's face it, we can be minorities in various ways, but the magic of India is that all of these minority identities are secure under the carapace of one common Indian identity that makes it possible for all of us to celebrate our smaller identities. The message is that you can be a good Muslim, a good Bihari, and a good Indian all at once. So the idea of India is of one land embracing many. It's the idea that a nation may endure differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, conviction, costume and custom, and still rally around a consensus. And that consensus is the simple principle that in a diverse democracy like ours, you don't need to agree all the time, so long as you agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. That's how we preserved the strength of our nation, this great ancient history, this common geography, this pluralist consensus, sustained by democracy that gives everyone an equal stake. And that's how we've maintained consensus on how to manage without consensus. Now, the world of the 21st century will increasingly be a world in which the use of hard power will carry with it the odium of mass public disapproval, whereas the blossoming of soft power, which lends itself so much more easily to the information era in which we live, will constitute a country's principal asset. Because remember, soft power is not about conquering others, it's about yourself. It's about being yourself. And since everyone is following the world on their computers, on their mobile phones, on the internet, on SMS, on WhatsApp, and God knows how many multiple sources of information we now all have, and of course satellite TV in our living rooms and our bedrooms giving us images from halfway around the globe, everyone is getting soft power elements projected onto the global consciousness. And it's either done deliberately through propaganda or unwittingly through the ways in which they're perceived as a result of news stories and other stories about them in the global mass media. Now, when it comes to propaganda, everyone knows what propaganda is. It's done by the government for business version. But when you're just being yourself and people like what they see, that goes a much longer way. So take, for example, something like Slumdog Millionaire, which by winning the Oscars and capturing the global imagination suddenly showed something of the vibrant, throbbing, transforming India, warts and all, in a way that looked very attractive. But well before Slumdog Millionaire, Bollywood had captured the imaginations of people around the world. And it's not just the NRI diaspora in the US or the UK, which seems to be what the Bollywood filmmakers are thinking about when they target their films. It's Africans and Arabs, Syrians and Senegalese. In fact, a Senegalese friend of mine in New York told me about his illiterate mother in a village in Senegal who takes a bus every month from her village to the capital city of Dakar just to see a Bollywood film. Now, obviously, she can't understand Hindi. She's illiterate, so she can't read the French subtitles. But our movies are made to be understood despite such handicaps. And she has a great time with the song and the dance, the music and the romance and the action, and she goes away with stars in her eyes about India as a result. Arabs, I mean, I remember a cinema theater owner, a chain owner in Oman, telling me how many movie theaters he had, and I said, so what kind of movies do you show? Is it mainly Egyptian? He said, no, it's mainly Indian. But I said, how many Indians do you have? He said, it doesn't matter, it's mainly Arabs who come, but they like watching the Indian movies. In Syria, a diplomat friend of mine told me a few years before the civil war that the only posters large enough to compete with those of the then president Hafez al-Assad were posters of Amitabh Bachchan. So maybe after the war it may switch to Shah Rukh Khan or someone, but that's what's going to happen. Now, Indian art, Indian classical music, Indian dance all have a global appeal as well. The work of Indian fashion designers striding across the world's catwalks, Indian cuisine. You can't go to any small town now in the West without finding an Indian restaurant or more. And the result is that the French have always known, right, that the way to a foreigner's heart is through their palate. We're doing this in India too. And the result is that a British Foreign Secretary declares chicken tikka masala as Britain's national dish. They invented it, so they're entitled to it, but the fact is, we know where they invented it from. And let's also face it, today in the UK, the so-called Indian curry houses, the Indian restaurants, employ more people than the iron and steel, shipbuilding and coal mining industries combined. So the empire can strike back. Now, yes, globalization makes some people in India worry whether all of this is going to invade India in reverse, that Baywatch and burgers are going to supplant Bharatnatyam and Bhelpuri. But I believe that our experience with globalization in the generation of the young people here who've grown up with that the last 25 years has demonstrated that we can drink Coca-Cola without becoming Coca-Colonized. Indians will not be any less Indian if, in Mahatma Gandhi's famous metaphor, we open the doors and windows of our house and let foreign winds blow through our house, provided we're anchored enough on our own feet that we won't be blown off our feet by these winds. And I think that that's true of India because our popular culture is resilient enough. Bollywood is competing with Hollywood on global screens and video stores around the world. Masala doshas still continue to outsell burgers. Chole bhature still outsells McDonald's. MTV still has fewer viewers than Hindi movies. So ultimately, we retain these foreign influences with security. We compete with them ourselves, and we transform them anyway, as the McDonald's veggie burger demonstrates, into something that belongs much more on the soil of India than into their globalized menu card. And then on top of that, we've got the allure of the past. It's not just the fact of today's globalization that we are such a player. Look at the extraordinary appeal of yoga and Ayurveda. The one thing that I've been always willing to give the government credit for was the adoption of the UN decision to create an International Day of Yoga, so that we actually have an Indian practice being celebrated on one day in every city around the world, and conveying, therefore, a tremendous enhancement and boost to our soft power. The past, therefore, exists. I went to Colombia. The president there said, can we have more Ayurvedic clinics in Colombia, in Latin America? This is the kind of transformation that our past is bringing about, but so does the future. IT has made a huge contribution, so that Americans today in Silicon Valley speak of the IITs with the same reverence they used to accord to MIT. And in that process, it's India that gains in respect. Now, sometimes this has unintended consequences. An Indian friend of mine who, like me, had majored in history or something, came across an anxiously perspiring European at an airport in Amsterdam saying, "Oh, you're Indian, will you help me fix my laptop?" I mean, in the old days, the cliche about India was, fakirs lying on beds of nails and snake charmers doing the Indian rope trick. Now, every Indian is assumed to be a software geek or a computer whiz or a mathematical engineer. That is also a transformation of our soft power influence around the world. And this becoming a global player goes across the board. I mean, the Tata Nano might have been a marketing disaster in India, but as an engineering marvel, it took the Geneva Auto Salon by storm. And then, of course, Tata's acquisition of Jaguar and Land Rover gave us that famous internet meme that went around. I'm sure most of you got it on your WhatsApp last summer when the British Prime Minister David Cameron was re-elected Prime Minister, and he went off to Buckingham Palace to reclaim his mandate. And Indians sent around things saying, British Prime Minister going to Buckingham Palace in an Indian-owned car, escorted by another Indian-owned car, the police Land Rover. And we've come a long way. When Jamshedji Tata died in the teeth of British opposition to set up India's first steel mill way back in 1905, At that time, an imperial official sneered that he would personally eat every ounce of steel that an Indian was capable of producing. Well, I'm sorry he didn't live long enough to see the day when Jamshedji Tata's descendants would buy the remnants of British Steel by acquiring the company called Corus, which had already subsumed British Steel. So that shows that India can do exceptionally well in a sophisticated international business environment. Or even, say, in the hospitality business, sticking with the Tatas, Jamshedji Tata in the 1890s was thrown out of a hotel in Bombay called Pike's Hotel, where the sign said Indians and dogs not allowed. So Tata went off and built a far larger, far fancier, far more opulent hotel called the Taj Mahal Hotel, which today is considered one of the finest hotels in the world, while Pike's has long since closed. So I don't know where the dogs are going these days, but they're not going to Pike's. So that's the kind of transformation that we're seeing now. In today's world, as Joseph Nye has argued, it's not the country with the bigger army that wins. It's the country that tells the better story that wins. And we, as a society, with all of this history that I've described to you, with a thriving free press and mass media, with the people whose creative energies are daily encouraged to express themselves in a myriad different ways, we have an extraordinary ability to tell stories that are more persuasive and attractive than those of our rivals. And that, to my mind, is wonderful. I often enjoy telling the story of Afghanistan, where we had no particular security presence. Our biggest asset in Afghanistan in the last decade, until about 2-3 years ago when the show closed, was the fact that nobody could call an Afghan at 8:30 in the evening and get him to pick up the phone. Why? Because that was the time that Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi was being telecast on Tolo TV. And it was such a popular show that something like 92% of the TV sets in Afghanistan were tuned to it. Sale of generator sets went up so that people wouldn't suffer power cuts. Mullah started complaining about the absence of people from religious functions in the evenings. Even weddings were interrupted for half an hour so people could turn their attention to the TV before returning to greet the bride and groom. Crime went up. I mean, I read a British news agency, Reuters story, so it wasn't PTI of India. Reuters said that on one occasion in Mazar-e-Sharif, robbers at 8:30 p.m. stripped a car of every detachable part, the windshield wipers, the hubcaps, the spokes, the side view mirrors, everything, and they scrawled on the car's windshield, Tulsi Zindabad. So you can see why I would have preferred Tulsi to remain on TV rather than try and run the Human Resource Development Ministry. So soft power is not what we can deliberately and consciously exhibit or put on display. It's us being ourselves. That show wasn't made to impress Afghans, it was made for us, and the result is that it actually influenced whole public. Here is a society, an Islamic society, where problems like this, family problems, are not discussed openly. They're kept literally behind the veil. But a TV show became an opportunity to discuss and confront these issues. Now that's the kind of strength we have, and I won't go on and on. I can talk about Mahatma Gandhi and Satyagraha and all of that. And I want to acknowledge right away that one more footnote is that the old line of Theodore Roosevelt used to be, speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far. Our problem with soft power sometimes is we speak softly, and that's very influential, but we have no stick at all. And that lack of hard power can sometimes hurt us. So we need to have both. You know, for China or Russia, I would often argue that kung fu movies and the Bolshoi ballet will do more for their image in the world than their muscular actions in Tibet or Ukraine. But the fact is that they have both. And for us in India, what we need is to balance both hard and soft power. Let's have no illusions about soft power. An Islamist terrorist who enjoys a Bollywood movie will have no compunctions about leaving a bomb in the same theater the next morning. It's happened. We know that the terrorists of 9/11 in America had their last meal at the McDonald's before they blew up those Twin Towers. The truth is, soft power is an asset, but it's not the whole answer, and it's not the full story. My final point is, I've given you all of these positives. Let's also remember that we do need to solve our internal problems to maintain that soft power in the world. You know, we have to not only sort of have the ability to cope with jihadist terror, but also the millions of our people who face the daily terror of poverty, hunger, ill health. That too has to be overcome for our soft power not to seem hollow to people around the world. We have to overcome our genuine internal stresses. You can't be the land of Gandhism and pluralism when you have a pogrom like happened in Gujarat in 2002, or when a poor man is lynched for the alleged crime of having beef in his fridge. That will be a setback to our soft power, and it is. Or when women are attacked in the streets of Delhi, that affects our soft power. It's not just that other women, single women tourists hesitate to come to our country. It also affected an Indian PhD student who had applied for a fellowship with a German female research professor who said, I will not take an Indian male student because you come from a culture that doesn't respect women. Became a huge controversy 2 years ago, 6 months after the Nirbhaya tragedy. But these are all assaults on our soft power, and we mustn't dilute our soft power by promoting bigotry, by tolerating misbehavior against women or oppressing women, by allowing violence to take place against minorities. These are things that undermine the narrative that I've given you, a narrative of tolerance, of openness, of embracing diversity, of embracing people of different backgrounds, ways of life. All of that is what we should always be all about. Our civilizational ethos has been our greatest asset, and it seems to me vital that we don't allow the specter of religious intolerance, sexual violence, political opportunism to undermine this great soft power, which is our biggest asset in the world of the 21st century. If we can maintain that, then true leadership in this globalizing world, a leadership of values, principles, and standards we can all admire, will follow. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. Jai Hind.
So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'm going to give you a very quick reminder. We're going to keep our questions as concise as possible. No comments, questions. We're going to hand the mic over here first. We're going to come there second.
Do tell me who you are so I sort of know where you're coming from, as it were.
Hi, I'm Shipra. I'm from Jaipur, and I'm an educationist. I give training to the prisoners and war widows. I would just want to ask a simple question. Why there are less women in politics in India? And those who are, they are mostly actresses or belong to a very powerful family. Where is the common woman in politics? Why there are no common women
So
in politics?
true. It's an excellent question that I've often puzzled about, because I've seen what happens even in my own state, which is a very enlightened, progressive state, which was the first place in the world, not just in India, in the world, to make education compulsory for boys and girls, going back to 1819 when one of our progressive queens did that. And yet, you hardly find women rising in politics. Part of it can only be explained by our culture. And there is a cultural predilection to keep women in the home or to feel protective about women. In North India, there's this very strong feeling that the honor of a family is tangled up with the behavior of the woman, and if the woman is out and doing her own thing in the street, that somehow the family gets a bad name. All of these beliefs are so deeply entrenched in our society that many women who would be able decide not to venture out. Now, what we've tried to do in government is to oblige some of these things to happen through law. So, for example, in our panchayats, not only do you have to have reservation, 50% of the seats have to be occupied by women, but on top of that, the presidentship of each village gram panchayat will rotate so that there has to be a woman president as well. Now, I will agree that, as some critics have said, that sometimes this has boiled down to politicians propping up their wives and continuing to control the seat or the presidency from behind the wife's name. But in significant numbers of cases, it has leveled the playing field for women of courage and enterprise to actually face this on her own. And there have been certainly some women who have come through family background, husbands, fathers, whatever, but some individual women in the grassroots, because the seat had to be a woman, or the president of the council of the Gram Panchayat had to be a woman, they have been able to take advantage of this provision and come forward. This is why I think at the state and national levels also, we need to make women's reservation compulsory. I know it makes many people uncomfortable, but the truth is that if we want a society which truly takes advantage of the qualities and the potential, the leadership ability of all our population, we cannot push one half of it into a corner and say, we will protect you. No, they have the right to protect themselves, and for that matter, to protect men too.
So we have time for one last question. I'm going to hand the mic over here.
Good morning, sir. My name is Anushka De, and I'm from Delhi. As you spoke about the soft power and hard power and also the economic power, I would like to ask that for India to get developed really quickly, what should be the ratio of all these powers? Like, should India focus more on economic or hard power or soft power?
You know, there's a notion that what you need is actually both soft and hard in the right balance, and that's what we should call smart power. That is, it's very clear, as I said, that soft power alone is not enough, because if you have soft power without hard power, you're a pushover. Anybody can walk over you. If you have hard power without soft power, you're just seen as a bully. So you need to strike a balance. Some countries have tried and failed to strike a balance. I think, frankly, China is a very good example of a country that has developed its hard power, but its very conscious efforts to develop its soft power have failed. They did the Beijing Olympics, for example, where they had all this wonderful song and dance show. The opening ceremony was a huge, having the Olympics at all was meant to be a major exercise in soft power, to impress the world not with Chinese economic might, but with Chinese culture and Chinese openness and Chinese sporting talent and all of that. But what happened? When journalists came to write about all the preparation, they started talking about the complete lack of freedom in China, that no one can express their views, that there are 30,000 internet police and so on. So the Chinese said, all right, we will have 7 designated locations outside Beijing where the Olympics were taking place. And in each of these locations, people can come and say anything they like against the government, whatever they like. But they said, of course, in order to have the right to stand in these places and speak, you need to apply for a permit. Every single person who applied for a permit, and I mean every single person without exception, was promptly arrested and thrown in jail. That was the end of any attempt to get soft power by doing that. So there's an example of how the Chinese have failed in their soft power. The Russians similarly have come across as rather too tough on Ukraine, on Crimea, on Syria and so on, and many people say this is and their domestic politics, the way they've suppressed their dissent. And finally, the Americans were scoring very high in soft power, as Joseph Nye argued, but then in their so-called war on terror and their conquest of Iraq, their Abu Ghraib prison and the torture of prisoners, the Guantanamo detentions, all of this extraordinary rendition suddenly gave a very unflattering image of American hard power to the world, and that considerably affected and undermined their soft power. So clearly you need to have both. India, I must say, I remember in 1971 when I was in high school, but perhaps all of you were not born then, we had a fabulous example of both hard power and soft power. Hard power because we won the war against Pakistan and created a free Bangladesh, allowing 10 million refugees to go home. And it was at the same time, the year in which India showed its self-reliance, raised its own resources to help these refugees, offered hospitality to these 10 million poor, desperate women and children. There was Ravi Shankar and George Harrison holding a concert for Bangladesh in Central Park. Intellectuals, writers, musicians around the world were showing support and sympathy for India. So on the soft power side, all the goodwill was for us. We won the war, and therefore the hard power opposition, even of the superpower of the day, America, which was an ally of Pakistan, didn't actually affect us. And that was truly an effective exercise of both smart and hard power. So that kind of balance we have to keep striking. It's not always easy. There is no magic formula, but you need both soft power and hard power. If you want, I can take one last question. If there's somebody else, there seems a lot of hands up, but I don't know how many.
You point the person out, I will walk up to the person and hand them the mic.
Whoever has the mic?
I have the mic. So
you have the mic?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
You
There are
point the
hands
person
right
out.
at the back who are getting left out, it seems. So,
Okay. You point the person out, I'll walk up to the person.
Okay, well, the gentleman with the red shirt has been standing at the back for a while, and then there's a lady with the white right there. They're both towards the center and back. Yeah, two short questions, please.
Yeah. So it's a pinkish orange shirt. I'm hoping this is the right person.
Okay, well, whoever's got the mic can go ahead.
Yeah, Tulsidas Pai here, sir, from Goa. My question is, how does India's soft power increase if the mainstream media props up a person who wants to destroy India? There is a person who doesn't take pride in being an Indian, and sorry to say, you along with many opposition leaders go out and promote that guy. So how does India's soft power increase? Thank you.
Clearly, the color of his shirt doesn't reflect his politics. You know, you actually asked a very relevant question, because the notion is, in what must we take pride? To my mind, we have a lot to be proud of in India. I've spoken with such pride about my India, right? But you cannot be pride of the my country right or wrong variety. Part of being proud of India, of the India that Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru and others fought to free, an India that built one of the most remarkably democratic constitutions in the world, part of that pride is our right to constantly try to make it a better country for everyone. So, when this young man whom you object to so strongly stands up and says, I want freedom from, he mentions casteism, he mentions capitalism. I don't agree with all of that necessarily, but I'm saying this is what he talks about. He is not saying that he doesn't take pride in India. He says, on the contrary, that he's proud enough of India that he wants it to be a country free of these evils. He has a brother fighting as a Jawan on the borders for India. Don't tell me his family is not proud of India. He's seen his mother struggle washing clothes to feed the family. His father bedridden. And yet he's taken pride. I'll tell you, K.R. Narayanan was a friend of mine, our first Dalit president. He's obviously much older than me, but when he was an outstanding student at university, came first in his university, they wouldn't give him his degree certificate at the same ceremony as his upper caste classmates. He grew up in a thatched hut with no indoor toilet, no running water. Now this man, he could have easily turned bitter against India, but instead he said the way to work to change this India for the better is to join the system and change it from within. And he rose up through the government bureaucracy, through the foreign service, became ambassador to Washington, to Beijing, came back to India, became vice chancellor of university, was given a political party ticket, became a member of parliament, became a minister, became vice president, became president. And can you imagine, as president, you're the symbol of the state that has treated you this way. But what we can take pride in is not the injustice he suffered, which we should be ashamed of, that our caste system did that to a good man. But we can take pride in the fact that through our democracy, through our affirmative action, through our constitutional change, through our liberal processes, we were able to ensure that a boy who suffered that humiliation and pain of discrimination rose to the highest office in the land and occupied Rashtrapati Bhavan. That's the India in which I take pride. And that's the India in which we must all take pride, in my view. We cannot say that being proud of India means supporting the discrimination against Narayanan because India is doing it. We cannot say that taking pride in India means supporting the butchery of two people because they allegedly consumed or sold or transported or stored beef. That, to mind, is not something we can take pride in. It's because I'm proud of India and all of the noble things India has achieved that I can turn around and say, this is wrong and I want to change it so I can continue to be proud of the India that I dream for, that I dream to build. All right, the young lady here who's got the last mic. I can't hear you. Sorry. Go on.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
I'm Jyoti Das from Hyderabad. I'm a lawyer.
Right.
I have read your story, The Great Indian Story, and I take pride in reading that too.
Thank you.
Considering...
The Great Indian Novel, you mean? Yeah.
Yes, The Great Indian Novel. And you have compared Indira Gandhi to the 100 Kauravas. That's the kind of politics that you've mentioned in that, comparing the Mahabharata. So considering the present scenario of politics with the Tulsi and everything else, do you think we'll have another version of it?
No, listen, first of all, the novel is a satirical novel, and satire works by getting the readers to laugh at many of the things they cherish, they hold dear. So as you know, many of you may not have read the book, it takes the epic, the Mahabharata, and characters, episodes, dialogues, philosophies from the Mahabharata, and it grafts it onto a satirical tale of 20th century India from the British days to roughly the 1980s. And in that, it has a lot of digs at everybody, from Mahatma Gandhi to Indira Gandhi. As I had to ruefully admit the other day in an interview, in today's climate, I don't know if I could have got away with publishing that book, because people have become much more humorless and much more prone to take offense today. But when the book was published in 1989, it won a few awards, won the Best Book of the Year from the Federation of Indian Publishers, and is now in its 45th or 46th reprint, including a Silver Jubilee edition has come out from Viking Penguin with slightly bigger print, because everyone used to complain about that book that, you may enjoy the book, but you'll definitely end up having to see the eye specialist afterwards. So now it's got a more friendly print available. The second thing is I wrote it when I wrote it. I wrote it between 87 and 88. And obviously, the Congress party I depicted of the 70s and 80s is not the Congress party of today. The BJP didn't even exist, or barely exist. It was created in 1918, had 2 seats in parliament when I was writing. So it's not as if that every work of fiction can be applied mutatis mutandis to the next political phase. Different eras call for different writers. All I can say is I hope that today's India finds its own satirist, because there's plenty to satirize as well in what's going on in our country today. Thank you all very much. You've been a terrific audience. Wonderful. And Jai Hind, let's take pride in India.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause. I request you to kindly stay on stage, sir. Requesting Mr. Shankar to kindly come up on stage. With the dignitary requesting Mr. Shankar. This is a little something from us to Mr. Shashi Tharoor. A big round of applause. A fantastic speaker, ladies and gentlemen. United Nations peacekeeper, Congress MP, writer, public intellectual and former diplomat, Mr. Shashi Tharoor. Thank you so much for joining us at this event.